I wish to acknowledge the original custodians of this land, the Aboriginal people of the nation, and their elders past, present, and future, and I extend that respect to other Indigenous people who are present. I acknowledge and respect the continuing culture and contributions they make to the life of the city. I have viewed Indigenous viewpoints and cultures in the everyday environment that I live in various ways. I have viewed viewpoints and cultures in places such as high schools, non-for-profit community centres, parklands, and more. I feel as if there is not enough representation of Indigenous culture by far. Rather than being able to notice Indigenous cultures being represented, I found that I had to seek these representations out and continuously go out of my way in search. I personally feel that there are limited examples of different aspects and understandings of the country I live in. For example, mainstream spaces such as shopping centres do not offer any representations of Indigenous culture that I could see. This causes me to feel disgust with my society due to the fact that I believe all cultures deserve to be represented, especially with Indigenous people being the original custodians of the land. Because they are the original custodians, they deserve a level of respect that they are not receiving, which is tragic. However, I was able to notice Indigenous culture being represented on a smaller scale within more private locations. I was able to find many examples of Indigenous culture within my previous high school. The school has dedicated an enormous amount of time and effort into being sure that they represent Indigenous culture through art, flags, and more. I was also able to see examples of Indigenous cultures in places such as not-for-profit community centres for families. This makes me feel as if there is hope for the Indigenous community because families and children are being exposed to the Indigenous cultures throughout posters, Indigenous-themed dolls, and artworks. While there are still not enough representations of Indigenous cultures, exposing children to the culture at a young age will lead them to being curious in the future, which will therefore encourage them to seek information and, in my opinion, lead to a wider spread of awareness throughout society. I have also viewed Indigenous cultures in more public places such as parklands. These examples of culture include signage and, once again, Indigenous art. While these examples are a good start at representing Indigenous culture in the community, I still feel there is a long way to go to representing the cultures, and it brings me much sadness to think about how slow the process is. On many topics regarding my own opinions concerning engagement with Indigenous country, people and cultures, my experiences are quite limited. Being non-Indigenous myself, I have not had many reasons in the past to involve myself in Indigenous culture, which I believe is due to having a non-Indigenous bias, which gave me the view that it had nothing to do with me because I was not part of that culture. Looking back, I'm ashamed of the opinion that I used to hold, and it has motivated me to work towards involving myself in learning about Indigenous cultures in the future, as well as encouraging a more thorough awareness in society. To conclude, this process has allowed me to confront my previous opinions and thinkings and has convinced me that though I myself am not Indigenous, it is still partially my responsibility to continue respecting and acknowledging Indigenous countries